Mr. Lee brought in experts to observe what I was doing in my classroom to make sure that I was meeting the needs. He told me that he liked what I did. That I was trying to connect, how we define characters through like Bloom's taxonomy, and the idea that, where we come from and what we do really kind of impacts our choices. And he was like, I really like that because you're kind of incorporating things I know into your lesson plan to get kids thinking about the way they learn. And as an IB teacher or MYP program or whatever, that's part of my job, is to find my students' approaches to learning. Like, what can they get? How can I get them more involved at their point of need? So I thought I had created this awesome lesson, because with MYP and IB, you also have to incorporate an opportunity for every kid to listen, to view, to read, to write, and to speak. So the idea there is that any type of learner has an opportunity to engage in the educational conversation. So I constructed this awesome lesson. I even incorporated a One Direction song. My kids did, small group stuff. They had to share out. It was a really cool lesson that I thought everyone was involved in. And he asked me, well, how do you think it went? And so I just told him all the stuff I told you. And he was like, yeah, all of that was really great. He said, I'm not asking about your lesson plans. I'm asking about how things went for the students. How do you think the students responded to your lesson? I'm like, awesome. I think they really got it. They were really engaged and, all of that. And he was like, yeah, there certainly was that aspect of out of the box things that they would never really expect a teacher to do or say or whatever. And he said, very original, and you're funny and you're dynamic, and I can see where you incorporate humor and real world things into your lessons. Particularly, you have a really good grasp of pop culture. He said, all of that is great. It seemed like for the most part, your kids were engaged. That was the key. That's where it seemed to kind of break down. He said, again, for the most part you were, but did you notice Thomas Jensen? And I said, well, of course I noticed Thomas Jensen. I noticed all my kids. And he said, did you notice Thomas Jensen? And I said, well, it was kind of crazy with all the moving around and, really having to, get together and mix it up with people they talk with and things like that. And he goes, you're not answering my question. Did you see Thomas Jensen? And he goes, like, did you really see? And I said, I guess I didn't. He goes, he didn't talk. He didn't move. When someone came over to him, he just kind of shrugged it off and was like, nah, I don't know. He didn't engage. So even when people were moving around, he might have stood up, but he didn't follow your instructions. And I said, oh, well, that happens with all the kids. I'm sure he got it. And he goes, well, I talked to him after class. And I was like, Mr. Badula, I'm a good teacher. I get all my kids. I really reach them. I conference with them. I get to know them on their level. And, Thomas, he's a skater, meaning he's a skateboarder, a longboarder. And so he's also into extreme sports. And he's like, well, that's cool. You really know that. And I can tell you've investigated that. He said, well, tell me one more thing about him. I said, well, I don't know that he necessarily, he just doesn't want to be here. Like, he is already sponsored. He's big into extreme sports. He's already on the competition circuit. And so his mind's just not here. And he goes, does that mean he doesn't need to learn? And I'd be like, oh, no, he needs to learn, but he just has other interests. So the next thing I know, he's handed me this article. And it's by the Medical Genetics Society. And it's about pain management and fatigue. And it says principles and proposal for multidisciplinary approach. And all this is about how we approach looking at the brain when it comes to pain. And it's about treating patients and their pain. It's about a congenital tissue disease, and that we have to look at all these aspects and not discount when someone is saying this or this or this, because they're really experiencing it. But our perception of what they're experiencing, plus what the stigma that goes with that stuff, it can be hard for them. So then the next thing he gives me is from this website called, well, it says, I'm not really sure where it's from. I'm going to have to kind of find that. But it's about how we need to reboot the brain. It says pain is an output of the brain, not an input from the body. And so it reminded me of this video I saw in one of my classes by this, I think it was a Dr. Norquist of neuroscience. And the one thing Dr. Medulla, I guess it's Dr. not Mr. Medulla, said is, I can tell this learning environment is painful for Tom. I was like, painful? And he goes, yeah. You see, he's already out in the real world. he's already making these, connections. And so then he hands me this other article. It's called Rigor Redefined, and it's all about how these people came in and looked at AP tests and things like that, and how with, these standardized tests, we're not addressing things like the way we're supposed to. And so even though we're, getting all this knowledge in kids, it's not really happening. Like, we're preparing them long enough to take their exams, and then it's kind of like, phew. And so the trend now is that what corporations are seeing is that these people coming out of school, they don't have the skills to really interact with people and to be team players, because they've just learned how to do school. And he said, Jill, I realize, you're doing all this stuff. He said, but Thomas is the exception to all this. So how are you teaching him when everybody else is doing what has already been done before? Wow. So I looked at those articles, and they're a little bit of my head, but I didn't really take it beyond the class. And so I'm thinking what maybe I could do for Thomas is kind of pull back on that, and especially looking at the Rigor Redefined and like the rebooting the brain stuff. It was so telling. Like, I need to reboot my brain in order to reach him, and the best way to do that is by saying, okay, hey, I know you're doing this. I know you're doing all of this on circuit. Why are you doing it? And where do you want it to go? And so, yeah, we're looking at motivation for why we do what we do. So, Thomas, what is your motivation? And so I pulled him in for a conference, and I gave him, I asked him those questions. What do you think about this? Hey, Thomas, come talk to us about this. And he said, because I've got a lot I want to share, but it just doesn't seem to fit. And I could talk about all the cool things that happen. I don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not as good as him. I think, man, I want to try that. And that's when it hit me. I have to tailor my instruction to give him that experience. So how am I going to do that? The one thing that he said, sometimes the videos go long, or sometimes, the slides have too much. He goes, I'm in a fast-paced world. I'm in a world where if I don't get this trick right, and, he's like, I need more practice than I need, like, this to-do list or reiterating the instructions. He's like, when you say it, I've got it. It's there. He was like, I want to get in and get it done, because that's what I have to do. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make my PowerPoints less wordy. The second thing I'm going to do, I'm going to give kids just a half sheet of, like, here are the instructions, so they can have it at their desk and so they can address it. The third thing I'm going to do, because according to Rigor Redefined, I saw group learning is the best, whether kids have interest or not, because there's a meeting of the minds. So I'm going to have kids work in groups more. I think that'll give Thomas opportunity to share his perspective, because he's really brilliant. It's not like he's not a school kid. Everybody's a school kid. I've always believed that, and that anyone can learn. So I'm going to give them multiple opportunities to practice in different ways. That was the other thing that he kind of said, is like, you have this kind of thing that is done this way, and then the next kind of thing is like on my own, doing it the same way. And I'm thinking, wait a second, I already did that here. Why am I repeating myself here? Which I was like, oh my gosh. So he said, can you switch it up where, like, I'm doing the same thing conceptually, but it's a completely different twist? He said, if you twist it like that, I'm going to love it. I'm going to try to come up with something totally different. So, like, if they're writing an essay, then, okay, tonight you have to go home and create, a 2-minute podcast, and I think it will really work. And then he also said, what if we talked more? That's a good thing. I'd like you to keep doing that, because this has really been helpful for me. And, now I got to be honest, I'm kind of excited about coming to school tomorrow to see, what's going to happen. He said, you do a lot of the talking. He said, what if we talked more? Like, you give us these things to read or whatever, and then we pull out something and, like, almost try to give the instruction a little bit based on something you've read. He's like, we can handle that. He said, you have to have the faith to let us do that. Whoa. Talk about something new. That's a big risk. In about a month, give them a survey to see, hey, do you feel class is more exciting? That learning is better? Are you more excited to come to class? Think, hey, let us. So, crossing my fingers, I hope this goes well, but I don't want it to be a painful experience, so I have to reboot my brain too. So Mr. Mardullo was like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited that you kind of want to incorporate these things. He's like, I'd love to come back and at least talk to you. And so I'm really excited, feeling better about things. I know it's going to take a lot of work. This will really reach all of the students. And